Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us again for the last session of the Workplace and Facilities Expo Virtual Festival. My name is Hugh Robinson, and I'm the Exhibition Director for Workplace and Facilities Expo Ireland, which will take place again next year on the 1st and 2nd of March 2022 at the RDS in Dublin. These panel discussions features industry leaders and experts discussing key areas. And this afternoon's panel is no exception. This session is entitled Sustainability, What Should Be the Focus of COP26, and is organised in association with the IWFM. This session, and I would like to thank the IWFM for their assistance in sourcing speakers and moderating the content. As well as this live panel discussion, the festival also has a range of on-demand content which can be accessed through the Workplace and Facilities Expo website. If you would like to ask any questions, please put them in the chat box and the panel will address these at the end of their discussion. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Workplace and Facilities Expo website as additional on-demand content early next week. The moderator for this afternoon's discussion is Greg Davis, Director of Market Development at Assurity Consulting. So without further ado, I shall hand you over to Greg. Greg.
Thank you very much, Hugh, and good afternoon and welcome everybody. As Hugh said, my name is Greg Davis. I'm your moderator this afternoon. I've spent the last 30 years in health, safety and environmental management, and over the last decade been heavily involved with the IWFM Sustainability Special Interest Group, either as lead for the annual survey we've produced or more recently as chair of the group. The title, we were looking at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Conference of the Parties, to give it its full name, or COP. And the COP26 summit, which is in Glasgow in November this year, will bring over 200 countries, businesses, NGOs, faith groups and a range of other interested parties together, with the aim of looking at and accelerating further action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. These vital climate talks should bring together the largest gathering of heads of state ever hosted in the UK, alongside climate experts and campaigners, to agree coordinated action on tackling what is increasingly a climate emergency. Some of the issues that are tabled for debate include creating a zero carbon economy and cutting carbon emissions, helping people, economies and the environment adapt and prepare to the impacts of climate change, safeguarding ecosystems, protecting natural habitats and keeping carbon out of our atmosphere, clean road transport and accelerating a move towards zero carbon road transport, and financing the shift to a zero carbon economy. In already recognising these, you could say that the UK government, in launching a further commitment to tackle climate change by doubling its international climate finance to 11.6 billion, through to 2025, and the Irish government, through its Climate Action Plan and the published draft Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Amendment Bill at the end of last year, are taking some action. But really, the purpose of the day is, what does all this mean for facilities and workplace management professionals, and where is the likely impact of future climate change going to be on our profession? So to debate these issues, and eagerly awaiting all the questions that hopefully you're going to ask, our panel today consists of, and you can see here, is Anne Beavis. Anne is Head of Sustainable Development at Crown Workplace. Sophie Hooper. Sophie's Head of Policy at IWFM. We have Rachel Scanlon. Rachel is Senior FM at iPut Real Estate in Dublin. And Toby Morgan, who's the LED Programme Manager for the Climate Group. So what I'd like to do just to start is to ask each member of the panel if they could introduce themselves to you, tell us a little bit about their experience and their expertise and working knowledge around sustainability in the facilities management marketplace. So I'll start as I can see you all, and Sophie will be the first.
Thank you, Greg. I was trying to get off mute. Hello all. So you know by now, my name is Sophie Hooper. I'm the head of policy at the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, and that means that I'm helping to raise the voice of the Institute, its members, and the wider workplace and facilities management profession. So I'm responsible for translating best practice into policy objectives and then engaging with stakeholders to ensure that that best practice is generally taken on board and that any concerns that affect workplace and facility professionals are mitigated. One of the relevant areas that I've been working on over the past 2 years that relate very much to the sustainability topic is the social value framework, or the development of the FM social value measurement framework, OMS plugin, to give it its full name. So we developed this framework together with the Social Value Portal and the National Social Value Task Force. And the work was prompted by the sustainability survey that Greg had already mentioned from the Sustainability SIG, which basically told us that the lack of a framework to really measure social value measures and actually sustainability outcomes and how to progress those, that the lack of such a framework in FM was really a barrier to implementing social value. So sustainability is one of our key priorities. It's fair to say that it's not just for the next year, but really kind of for the foreseeable future, because from a policy perspective, I really do see that sustainability is kind of central to all that we do as a professional body. So my focus will be for the next foreseeable years, to be working on many more tools for our members so that they can drive sustainability through their organizations and workplaces. Perhaps it's wrong to really say it because the massive task that's ahead of us is quite substantial. But this crisis really is an opportunity for workplace and facilities professionals to demonstrate how key they are to achieving many of the sustainability outcomes that their organizations will seek to deliver. So this is really an opportunity for them to once again demonstrate the value that they add to their organizations. That's me, Greg.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you very much, Sophie. And Rachel is next. So over to you, Rachel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Scanlon. I worked as a sustainability manager for, say, the best part of 13 years in the UK for a construction and FM company. Recently moved to Ireland 18 months ago, now work for IPUT, which is a real estate company based in Dublin. They're the leading commercial property investment company in Ireland. And it's a really exciting job role for me where I get to implement some of the sustainability items that I used to push with my other hat on very strongly into the FM managers. I'm now responsible for doing that myself. So I understand some of the challenges that some of the FMs might have had with some of my initiatives that I used to try and get everybody to deliver. But I also, it's really exciting because now I can actually put things into place and you really make changes for the buildings. I'm really interested in focusing on energy, the transition to net zero, the pathway the buildings are going to take to get there. We've got a mixed portfolio, we've got older buildings, brand new buildings. I'm really lucky that I'm able to influence part of the design now. So I'm in that's a really privileged position to be into. So it really feels that I'm part of the whole journey and understanding the challenges more and more as I go along that whole chain. And hopefully we can start tying up some of the handover gaps, say from the design to construction to FM, the soft landings, the whole life cycle approach for buildings. I come with sort of a background, as I say, in sustainability. Environmental sustainability was my core. However, social and economic, being in a real estate investment company, now I'm getting to understand the importance of the green finance agenda and how that's going to impact the future. I get it now. So it's really interesting to be part of that and see firsthand what that means for businesses and also what it could mean for sustainability and reducing carbon emissions in the future. Thanks for inviting me to take part of this. That's me done. I'll pass over.
So thank you very much, Rachel. And Anne next, please.
Sorry about that. I was just had trouble with my mute. So my name's Anne Beavis, Head of Sustainable Development at Crown Workspace. And I've worked in environmental sustainability for nearly 20 years, coming from a background originally working in the waste sector. But ever since then, I've developed further into reuse, waste prevention, and looking at circular economy business models and how they can be adapted as a way of reducing waste and environmental impact. And with my work with Crown Workspace, this has been particularly targeted at the FM sector because they help organisations move and change the workplace. And so looking at main waste streams that arise from that kind of activity, we've set up, I've helped set up office furniture and IT equipment repairing, refurbishment and remanufacturing. And to me, I've been part of the SIG now for a number of years, working alongside Greg and the others, looking at sustainability in FM and what it means. And there's obviously a wide spectrum of key factors, a growing spectrum as we keep discovering. But I think the work that we've been doing in terms of defining what sustainability means in the sector, finding measurements and benchmarks so people can all start to talk about the same language and the same measurements has been critical, some of the critical foundations now. I'm very much looking forward to having COP and looking forward to chatting with my associates on here about what it means for the FM sector. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Anne. And last but by no means least, Toby.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me today. Really good to be here. So I'm Toby Morgan, the LED Programme Manager at the Climate Group. So we're an international NGO headquartered in London, but we also have offices in New York, New Delhi, Beijing and Amsterdam to target those key markets. And basically we work with business and government leaders all over the world to accelerate climate action. And our goal is a world of net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and greater prosperity for all. I'm particularly interested in the built environment and how we can enhance it, not only to make energy efficient buildings, but also healthy and productive buildings as well. And I think FMs can play a key role in that. We've all heard a lot of talk, in the run up to COP about net zero and what does that actually mean? There's lots of debate about that at the moment. And I think it's one that will rumble on, but it is a useful metric to work towards. But there's various definitions of how to reach net zero. So it'd be good to talk a bit more about those in the session. And what I'm interested especially is the positive impact that energy efficiency can play. And the International Energy Agency estimates that we can achieve 40% of the global greenhouse emissions that were needed to get to 1.5 degrees. So it can play a huge part. It's often an unsung hero of climate change mitigation, but I'm really keen to push the energy productivity agenda. And also we forget about the kind of huge impact it can have on jobs as well. So the IEA also estimate for every £1 million or $1 million invested in energy efficiency improvements in buildings, it creates around 10 to 15 jobs as well. So it's really interesting spin when we start talking about the green economic recovery and those side of things as well. So yeah, glad to be here and look forward to talking with you all today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Toby. So to the audience, in advance of starting questions, you've seen and heard the array of expertise we have across the sustainability piece. So if you do have a question that you've been itching to ask, either specifically about COP or more broadly about sustainability, then please do pass them through, and I will endeavour to ask them. But starting off, a first general question to you all would be, what role does workplace and facilities management play in supporting the aims of COP, not just from an organisational perspective, but nationally and internationally? Does anybody like to start us with that?
It's a big one, Greg, but I'll go for it. Colleagues can correct me afterwards. Well, for me, having looked at this particular area now, I think it's it's very obvious how important that FMs are, because they are so critical to many of the areas that impact on net zero, reducing carbon emissions, greenhouse emissions. There's so many areas that FMs can play a role in. In the UK, for example, transport and buildings are the two biggest emitters now that the electricity system has been kind of decarbonised, but FMs can really play a significant role through the decisions they make around maintaining and operating, not just building, but also the choices that they offer the workforce that they support in the workplace. Decisions around the heating, the ventilation, supporting transport choices for people, building electrical car infrastructure, ensuring that the own fleet of service providers goes electrical, for example, but also with the changing working patterns now, with a lot of people working from home, supporting people through the use of technology, setting that up for the future so that people don't necessarily need to take transport on a daily rate to go into their offices. So I think looking at all the variety of decisions that have to be made around work and that also take place around buildings and transport, I would say that they play a huge role, not just at organizational level, but the multiplier effect of that at national and then, of course, international level. So that was a first stab at that.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you for that, Sophie. Anybody?
Greg, I just want to build on what Sophie's saying. I think there's two key elements of the role that I think make it so important in helping sort of drive the wider sustainability message. One is obviously the power of procurement, because I've done a lot of work in sustainable procurement and looked at the barriers to why people aren't engaging with more circular economy focused products and services. And there's, when you spend time with facility managers who are serious about sustainability, they can really help drive and overcome what those barriers are, because they can look at ways of maybe trialing different things before rolling them out, doing mini projects. And they can be proactive and work with colleagues in procurement and in compliance to overcome the perceived barriers. So there's that procurement and driving change through that role, but also because they have sight across a whole of a business and all the different areas of operation, they have a wide spectrum of influence as well in terms of disseminating advice, sharing good practice, looking at the different initiatives, maybe across an estate portfolio or across different buildings. And having exposure to what works well in different parts. So I think those two elements, make it a really critical role, in particular, at this time when there's that focus.
Okay, thanks for that, Anne. So you're saying then that from the traditional FM role of actually delivering on other company objectives in terms of sustainability, is that the FM is now positioned to actually influence and direct far more. As you mentioned in your introduction, Rachel, you're now finding in being able to have more influence in the design and specification rather than just having to manage what's been put there for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sort of being able to be part of that whole line, and I know, and it's still new to me, so I'm still figuring it out. But being able to be with the investment side where the decisions are being made, and then being able to have a voice at that table is becoming increasingly more important for all FMs. We all know the design cycle. That's sort of there's always been breaks in the chain in that design to maintain to end of life cycle of buildings, and we're all trying to get that a little bit slicker. So anything we can do to try and make the handover from the typical, where it used to be design to construct to maintain to demolish, all of those points in that cycle, if we can get them slicker, are important. And often I think about if we gave an FM the design responsibility for a building, they wouldn't start with the outside, they definitely start with the inside. And is there something in that? Should we be doing more of that designing from the inside, and then asking architects to say, actually, can you make this look like the building it needs to look for the type of client that needs to be in there? And there might be something in that.
Excellent, thank you. And Toby, you see parallels there with energy in terms of how energy should and will be delivered in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think Rachel's picked up on some really important points, and the World Green Building Council have recently launched a health and wellbeing framework, which kind of looks at not only sustainability of buildings, but the whole, occupant and the whole life cycle of the building as well. So recommend giving that a read to all the listeners out there. But I think from what we've seen, COVID has massively changed our ways of working, as we all know. We're all sat at our homes here presenting this instead of being in Ireland. But I don't think we're never going to go back to people being in the office 5 days a week, because working from home has its challenges, and especially if the kids have been off school and stuff like that. But I think people have seen the benefits of this. And why do you want to go traipsing into central London 5 days a week and spend a fortune on commuting if you don't need to? So I think we're going to these changes are going to be lasting, and we're going to be using buildings a lot more differently. We've already seen some of the large city banks, which tend to be the business leaders in this area. They're already getting rid of office space. So I think there's a recent survey of the top 20 British banks, and they were all at least reducing their floor space by 20 to 40%. So it's going to be huge. And similarly, I think other companies will do the same thing. So what we need then is to use our buildings more effectively and efficiently, because if you've got a huge building and it's completely underoccupied, so you might have 40% occupation, you don't want to be heating and cooling and lighting all the areas that are underoccupied. So we need to use energy smarter. So I think FMs have a massive role to play in that, because they're aware of where energy is being used in buildings. Therefore, we can sort of use these new smart tech, hopefully to use not only kind of buildings more effectively and efficiently, but also use people more effectively and efficiently. I think also it'll really help in the return to work when we do start going back sort of post-COVID or during COVID, in the next few months, hopefully. Can we use these smart tech inside buildings to enable people to safely go back to work? So, for example, having occupancy sensors can really help not only turn off lights or heating and cooling when they're not needed, but also help people, building managers, ensure that we can maintain social distancing and certain parts of the building aren't overoccupied, etc. So I think, we're going to have to use energy and space a lot smarter going forward.
Excellent, thank you, Toby. And just relating that back to COP in November and how that's going to receive the publicity it will do undoubtedly over the remainder of the year. I mean, what do you think the significance of having a COP in the UK is this time around? And perhaps, Anne, you could answer this one.
Yeah, well, I think the benefits for wider climate change agenda in the UK is being put under real pressure, or I very much hope so it is, because by hosting COP, there's more scrutiny to make sure that you're practicing what you preach, and we've seen this already with the forced review of the new coal mine in Cumbria. I think it'll also force some UK businesses that maybe are committed to the agenda to showcase and maybe commit further to targets and roadmaps that are more progressive. From what I'm seeing, there's quite an investment in the COP programme of activity. So I'm already seeing shared learnings and coaching opportunities. I'm seeing training that's come out. And hopefully with this kind of awareness raising will lead to, raising the agenda more in the consciousness across society as a whole. There's initiatives that have arisen, such as the Race to Zero and the Race to Resilience. And this is where bigger organisations are helping other organisations that are just trying to move up the sustainability ladder to work with them and mentor them to give them to give them support with those commitments. So I think having that focus on the UK brings an additional programme of activity. I think certainly, in the UK, hopefully that filters into our European neighbours and into Ireland, because I think everybody will have the spotlight on them now. But I think also there is an expectation, though, for tangible, impactful and quite immediate action as a result, because we're very aware of the tight timetable. I don't think it's a time for signalling or suggesting or signposting. I think, you know, that what COP is bringing to the UK and certainly the European agenda is a time for some real tangible outputs. And I think that the impact of its proximity, you know, to ourselves means that hopefully there'll be much more positive outcomes as a result.
Okay, thank you. And expanding on that slightly, Toby, using your experience, how do you believe companies could use their influence on sustainability to actually engage with their customers and clients? Is COP26 an opportunity for that, for not just those businesses in the UK, but in Ireland and elsewhere, to actually leverage the fact that this is occurring? And we have, as I said, over 200 organisations, heads of government turning up there to actually use that influence to start to influence their client base.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, it can be a key tool, and we know that companies can really have a positive influence over their customers and their clients. So if they're engaged with it, they can use that engagement with their customers and with their clients. And, you know, it's almost expected now that you have a positive climate change strategy, and, you know, you might as well lose customers and clients if you don't have that, you know. And having COP in the UK is an ideal time to promote it. And we know as well that the public support for climate action is growing all the time. Even in these, you know, difficult times during the pandemic, support has remained solid. So people, you know, we've been immediately dealing with COVID-19, but the climate change issue has not gone away. It's not gone off the public radar. So I think, you know, it shows that there's real support out there. And I think what we can do and what companies can do is use it to, when we start talking about it, to talk about the economic recovery, and linking it in with those key sort of developments. Obviously, we've just had the budget in the UK, in Britain, but also it's, you know, the EU are talking about the EU green wave. So linking it in with these key moments. So we're not just talking about climate change; it's all the issues that link around that and how the economic recovery can really go hand in hand. And also I think when people talk to clients and customers, just breaking it down into more manageable segments as well. So maybe not talking about climate change as a big thing, because it's a very large issue to get your head around, but kind of breaking it down into key specific issues. So, you know, what are you particularly interested in? Is it air quality? Is it urban spaces? You know, is it even saving money? Because we know everything you do to save energy saves money as well. So it's a business aspect. And also, you know, having my focus on buildings, bringing that human aspect to buildings as well. So it's not just four walls and, you know, the pipes inside it. It's the humans that interact with that building as well. And that's real key. And, you know, the humans in any building are the most important aspect and the most sort of valuable aspect for business as well. So you don't want just energy efficient buildings. You want buildings that work well for the people inside them. And, you know, if we have healthy and productive buildings, that's good for business as well.
Excellent, thank you, Toby. Rachel, from a perspective in Ireland, now I know there's been some recently following the latest climate action plan and the bill off following that they're looking to achieve 7% reductions year on year in carbon is one of the stated aims. How is COP being viewed currently or discussed across Ireland? Does it have the visibility, bearing in mind it's up in Scotland?
Yeah, I think it's the same as the UK, really, in terms of it, sort of the awareness of COP26, how people are sort of finding it through social media channels, how companies are using it as a training exercise or awareness. So yeah, I think it's probably similar to how the UK is managing it at the moment. Okay,
thank you. So, in your experience, how is COP26 now being viewed within your organisation? Oh, we've got a number of different organisations here from a perspective, and is it something that's on your senior management agenda, or is it there elsewhere in the marketplace? I see you nodding there, Anne. Perhaps you'd like to.
Originally, obviously, it was supposed to be last year. So at the start of last year, it entered onto the agenda in terms of recognising that it was going to raise the profile more. And as a company who prided themselves in, you know, sustainable services, we sat down as a management team at Crown Workspace and said, what should we be doing more? What innovation can we align to it? What, you know, because it's great to innovate, but you've got to continually innovate. There's an agenda to be reached. Obviously, then COVID hit and the date got put back, and actually so much changed. But when the date was reset, it has caused it made that agenda come back quicker, because I think a lot of people, we're at that sort of tipping point now where it's, which way do you go? Do you just quickly do things easily or quickly because there's a sense of emergency, or do you put climate change right at the front and centre of decision making regardless? And now, having it in November, having it this year, has instigated and brought back the discussions at a senior level about what we're doing, where's the focus, and how can we get our innovation programme back up there. I fear if COP wasn't happening, that would still happen. But I feel that knowing the dates there and knowing that you want to be part of the story and carry on innovating, that has certainly helped us here and helped me push the sustainable development agenda internally. So I think that's a real positive.
And perhaps the same question to yourself, Sophie. How is the IWFM viewing COP for this year?
Well, I think very similar to Anne, because obviously with it being last year, we started working on an action plan. You've been part of that yourself. We started building relationships with other stakeholders that we thought it would be very good to build relationships with. Toby, hint, hint. So it's something that has been at the forefront of our mind. It being pushed back almost gave us an opportunity to really double down on some of the efforts that we want to do and just work through it in a more meaningful way. I mean, not that it wasn't going to be meaningful, because this is so important and it's so core and it's, well, important, full stop. But yeah, driving it forward and having that extra time just gives an opportunity to build back bigger and better, kind of. So it's very, yeah, very positive. The other thing I would say as well is that it's, as a professional body, it's important for us not to just talk about it. We need to act upon it as well. So that is an important element as well, and possibly we don't talk enough about that. But yes, that's definitely what we're trying to do. So making sure that whatever we talk about, we can take forward ourselves. So it's a very important element within our organisation. And I actually want to kind of half come back on something that Toby said around clients and the previous question around how important it is for companies to use their influence on sustainability to engage with clients. I sometimes wonder if it's not almost the other way around as well, and really going back to the end user, because more and more people are getting more and more engaged with sustainability and really want to know how they can make significant changes in their everyday life. And they're starting to challenge not just their workplace, but also people that they buy products from, whether it's cleaning or whatever, about how it can be done better, especially because now you're at home all the time, so you can see that recycling bin filling and then some. So I think it's progressing towards the COP26. I think, or I hope at least, there is a greater optimism, because people that might previously not be as engaged, I've got a sense that people are just much more engaged, even at micro level, not just at macro level.
Brilliant, thank you. One of the focuses of COP is green finance, and perhaps a question to you, Rachel, is how do you think getting green finance, getting this element of the proposition right, could improve sustainable performance within our buildings?
Well, I think in the last, say, 5 years, green finance has moved from, say, a CSR, a social agenda item, to C-suite. It's a decision that, you know, we used to be asked to provide carbon disclosure through reporting, But now actually it's around how can we demonstrate that we've got a pathway to net zero in place, things like science-based targets, TCFDs, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. They're all becoming more and more part of everyday life in a green finance investment decision-making. We've recently seen, say, a company like Aviva this week pledge to go net zero for all scopes 1, 2 and 3 by 2040. And that includes all of their investments. So that's a really, I think they're the first insurer definitely in the UK and Ireland to go forward with that, but actually possibly the world. And when you think about what that actually means in terms of, say, you know, what will they be asking the companies that they're investing in to provide in terms of sort of disclosure and plans, what will they then in turn be asking in a real estate context? What will they be asking us in terms of how can we demonstrate that we're going to be somewhere that they can place their money that isn't fossil fuel intense? It then means that, all of the companies who put sustainability at the forefront of their decision making, all of those who've got net zero targets and they've robustly calculated those through maybe a formal way of something like science-based targets, that just means that people who are investing their money know where it's going, and that cycle then can be continuous. It then feeds back into the cycle, and we generate more and more sort of sustainable green opportunities for the built environment. I think sort of on a local level, like in an FM perspective, what we can do is create these pathways that I mentioned earlier about, we've got the 55 kilowatts of hours per of the BBP Better Building Partnership targets for buildings as the net zero target. So for my buildings, that's what I'll be focusing on trying to get to through optimization in the first instance. And then actually, then when you've reached where you can through sort of optimization, then you look at your next capital plans and, your life cycle plans and so on and so forth. But then how do you demonstrate all that back up through the finance chain so that, say, your investors know that you've done that, you're planning to do that, and you're going to do that, and that their money and their investment is being invested in a green supply?
Thank you. That's a perfect segue into a question we've had in from somebody. So thank you very much for that. And the question is, so what do you believe are the difficulties or opportunities for property owners stroke management companies to create commercial advantage through a sustainable agenda? And if that while you're thinking about that bit, this is a stipendary section to it saying, particularly given a price-based client base. Anybody like to pick up on that one?
Well, I can pick up on it a little bit because, we've all seen the value in sort of lettings and real estate for green spaces. It's been proven that if you've got your LEED Platinum or your BREEAM Outstanding, that you can ask and get a premium rate for rental. I think what it also means, and Toby touched on it earlier, is this whole productivity piece around, if you can, that it's happening, and I can see it happening, that people are not just buying a space because it's a nice office space in a nice area. We're now seeing the metrics more and more about how different workplaces are more productive for employees. And 90% of your costs of a typical business is labor. If you can make them 10% more productive, then you've actually outweighed any benefit by saving money elsewhere. So I think all the spaces and how we use them in terms of sustainability isn't just on the green anymore. It's about how we can include, say, social, the environmental, and obviously the economic. But it's the balance more and more that is that sustainable business. When you think of sustainability and the word itself, it's more than green. It's about continuation. We all know what it means. But if you look at it that broader spectrum, you can create spaces that are valuable and demonstrate that. Then I think that's the proposition for definitely for real estate or for the future.
Okay, thank you for that. So perhaps again looking at it from a slightly different perspective, particularly with multi-occupied buildings where there is a natural barrier to sustainability, particularly in long-term, high-cost items such as more efficient chillers within the property. In that, if you're a tenant that's only in a building for 5 years, are you really going to want to be paying for something that may improve the performance of the building over 20, 25 years, but you're not going to see the majority of that? How do we square that circle? And perhaps that's a question to ask yourself, Toby.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah, I think it's a real massive issue and real key issue that we've explored at the Climate Group. So we've run a number of workshops on sort of landlord and tenant relationships around sustainability issues, but it is a thorny issue. You know, we've seen some companies, some landlords who've really embraced this sustainability agenda and seen it as basically a business selling point. So we're going to attract a higher caliber of companies if, you know, we've got really sustainable offices, very you know, healthy and productive buildings as well. So I think it is a bit chicken and egg, but yeah, a lot of the complaints come from tenants saying, you know, our landlord won't do this because, you know, it's not in their financial interest to do it. So I think what we need is some real key sort of collaboration around all these issues. So with any climate issues, collaboration is key. So we try and bring together, you know, the big landlords and building occupiers as well. But it's really tricky. Often having some sort of legislation, policy, guiding principles from governments or from cities, whatever it's going to be, can really help things along as well. But I think it's going to become a growing issue as well, because we're going to see more co-working spaces if people are, you know, downsizing from their huge office in the middle of a city somewhere, which they don't really need anymore. So we've even, you know, a lot of these shared office spaces like WeWork and Uncommon and those types of things, they're actually really high spec because they see the value of doing that to attract the best and the brightest companies. Also as well, we're seeing a lot of power with potential employees, with you know, potential recruits, that they want to join businesses where they're in sustainable offices. So, you know, if you've got two similar businesses and you're umming and ahhing which one to join, you're going to go for the one, if that's your interest, in the one that's got the most sustainable or, you know, nicest office in that way. So I think it is a bit chicken and egg. There's lots of issues that still need resolving, but I think what we need to do as well is raise that kind of awareness to landlords why it's a good thing and what the business opportunity there is, and that it's not just something they've been forced to do. They actually see the value in it.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you, Toby. So maybe just from a COP perspective, and summing up, it was a point you made earlier on, but just like to elaborate on that is with all this information, this understanding we have, how can the FM industry use this awareness and use COP to help raise and drive sustainability in their organisations? What would you say would be the key points for those FMs out there who are listening to us, for them to be able to use and leverage that?
Well, I think at the start, Greg, you outlined the key themes that are being discussed at COP, the green travel or the carbon reduction. All of those different areas that form the agenda will all have a programme of events that are leading up to them, as I said. And there's, as I mentioned earlier, there are these knowledge learning and signposting groups that bring together case studies and best practice of people that are already slightly further in the journey, that have got practical experience, that have seconded their time to this initiative to be able to help others that are trying to take the next step forward. And I think, you know, for some FMs, they'll be part of organisations that have set their net zero carbon targets, and actually, you know, they're just looking for some other guidance and perhaps advice from those that have that are maybe slightly ahead of them to maybe share openly in a sort of in a spirit of trying to drive the agenda, their advice and experience and learning, because these are all new steps for organisations. But I think there'll be other businesses where maybe the business hasn't yet really engaged with the agenda at all, and the FM could be that person who can start to bring the key themes from COP into the discussions and start to make So, you know, make them part of an organisational decision making. It goes back to the point that I've said before, and something that I do think is really critical in this agenda is this Build Back Better narrative is something that's had, you know, a real strong support around it. And I think it's really important to keep that narrative part of every discussion, but make sure that it's always translated in the actions that are defined. I'm both optimistic and concerned at the same time, because, you know, at any time, anyone that's been involved in sort of project management around FM will have seen the times where you've got to compromise. You know, something's got to give. But, you know, usually the timeline is distinct, and other bits, or the budget is distinct. I think it's really important to make sure that the carbon and climate change decisions are distinct as part of those FM discussions that are happening, rather than they be the things that are given away, because it's, you know, it's a unique timescale we've got around this. And FM, as I said before, they're the doers, they're the procurers, they're the specifiers, so they are also uniquely placed, and COP does give them the advantage of learnings of other organisations and workflows and discussions around the key things that they're going to be looking at.
Brilliant, thank you, Anne. Anybody like to add anything or contribute further there? No, that's fine. I think that was as full an answer as we could have got. I mean, moving on to one of those phrases that I think you've all brought up, and this is this notion of net zero. And I refer you back to a recent BSI report, just by way of some stats to introduce this. And two of the quotes I have from this report is that while the knowledge of the concept of net zero is growing, understanding of its implications for individual businesses is poor, with 64% of those we surveyed were not confident that they fully understood the implications to their organisation. It went on to say there is a genuine desire to achieve net zero targets, with 7 out of 10 businesses confirming that their organisation have made or are considering making a commitment to net zero. But the vast majority, 82%, then said they needed more guidance if they were going to set realistic and achievable targets. So on that basis, general question, a goal such as net zero key to understanding and actually providing not only a tangible measure of commitment, but actually a tangible measure to mitigating and reducing climate change? And if so, what other areas could be targeted with similar initiatives? And I appreciate that's 2 parts to the question. While I give you all a little bit of time to consider that and see if anybody would like to start us off on this point.
I'll go.
Sophie.
Not because I've got necessarily the perfect answer, but just because I like to go first. Yes and no. It's not quite what you want to hear. I think, yes, they are key to understanding, because it's very clear as to what the outcome is that we want to achieve. We want to achieve net zero in, you know, that balance around emissions, putting out and taking back in. So that's clear. But I think where there are so many questions around is really, where should one focus on? What is important for the organization? And even within FM, when we're having discussions with partners or colleagues, you can really see, like, where do we even start? When we're having discussions with roundtables, some people are going, the discussion is just too broad. Where does that lead us? So I think it's very important for us as an organization as well to kind of define the areas that are important for FM to make a difference in, and then where the kind of not easy gains, but where it easier is to start. And so it's very important to really break it down, the different areas that one can make a difference in, and the tangible actions that one can take. And it's also important to realize that you just can't do everything at once. So it's okay to choose and to focus, because then you can achieve more, because you're going to need support from across the organizations. You need the understanding, you need to have that leadership drive. So it's yes and no, because it's such a massive area to make a difference in. It's important to crystallize for each and every single organization, which will be on a different journey than any other organization, to determine where they are, the areas they want to make a difference, and then how they will progress that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Toby.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I would follow up on Sophie's point there. And yeah, I think it's a tricky one. We've seen a bit of a backlash recently to net zero. And, you know, some people complaining that it lets people off the hook because they can basically offset the rest that they can't reduce in the first place. So I think the fundamental thing is, you know, and FMs can play a key role in this, is energy efficiency first, reducing your demand first. That's the key thing. And then you're obviously having to buy fewer renewables or offset, you know, a lower amount. But, you know, key first is getting it the right way around. Don't go for renewables first. Reduce your energy use in the first place. That's the cheapest thing to do. It's the simplest thing to do often. So go for that first. So yeah, there has been a bit of a negative backlash towards the term net zero. But I think it's a really good hook, actually, and we all know what it means. Not what it means per se to achieve that, but what it means overall. We need to reach net zero by 2050. You know, as an economy, as a world, we need to hit. That's the target to hit. So that's a really nice hook to go on. And also, it's a nice catchy slogan as well, which is always good in these types of things. Yeah, so there has been a bit of a backlash, but there's also now been a bit of a backlash to the backlash. So people are saying, you know, it is a good thing. You know, it is confusing how we get there, and it might not be clear to companies or to governments how they do that. But overall, I think it is a positive step and one we should all be working towards.
Sorry, Greg, can I just come back on the points that Sophie and Toby have just made on that? I think what's really important about having a term like that is it flags up a singular point of focus. And so many organisations, large organisations, in the last 12 to 18 months have been making their different declarations, which is great in some respect. But I've been personally involved in doing the UK and Ireland strategy for responsible and sustainable business for Crown, and I was sat with a board of directors and senior leaders, and it made me wonder how many of them really do know what net zero or this terminology that I've been using for 20 odd years, or evolving terminology. So when I was starting to, before going into the strategy that I was presenting to the board, I said, I'm going to spend 15 minutes and talk through some of these key terms. And afterwards, people thanked me, because so many senior leaders in businesses that currently are being held accountable to achieve net zero, I wonder how many of them really do know what the terminology really does mean, or how many of them are seeing it in the headlines, seeing it being discussed. And if it's not been part of their business discipline, maybe their discipline's been accountancy, or maybe their discipline's been health and safety, you know, you can read around the topic, but the current generations are learning this stuff in school, but maybe the senior leadership teams that are there now haven't done. So I think having this terminology that people see, that they see their clients are focused on, but maybe they recognise they don't have the knowledge and understanding of it, makes them realise that it's something that they have to invest in, it's something that they need to build their knowledge in, and it's something that their teams need to have. So, and to the second part of your question, I do think there's a communication lesson there for other parts of sustainability. We could probably talk about that all day, as you know, but I think net zero has brought the climate change and let's call it the environmental sustainability bit to a singular point of focus for good and bad. I think other areas of sustainability need that absolute clarity of focus. And we can work on that and have another session. But yeah, definitely.
Excellent, thank you. Rachel, having lived and worked in Dublin for the last 18 months, what are you seeing as the biggest challenges for Ireland in achieving its net zero targets?
That's a good question. I think the similar challenges to the UK. I think the major carbon emitters for Ireland would be slightly different. Would be agriculture, transport, and burning fossil fuels. Sort of recently, as in sort of late last year, they sort of moved away from burning, say, peat for sort of power stations. So that would have been instead of coal, and obviously it's probably more impactful CO2 wise than coal would be to burn peat. So obviously that was a huge transition for them. And one of the challenges around that in rural Ireland would be perhaps, what the social implications of that would be in the transition for localized jobs and how to replace those. So for me, that was a real sort of eye-opener to see that transitional, everyone talks about transitional risks and things like that, but to see the social impact potentially from that in a first-hand experience was, I live literally 10 minutes from one of the peak power stations. They're talking to local people. That's exactly what their concerns were. I think sort of the replacement for gas in Ireland and heat sources is going to be a challenge. It's a different setup and infrastructure. There's some really interesting trials in terms of, say, biogas injection into the gas networks, which could have positive impacts for, say, agriculture, because most of it's going to come from the AD from dairy plants or things like that. So that's a real positive. And obviously the wind, onshore wind is huge in Ireland. So that could help. Definitely, I see the electrification sort of moving to renewable very quickly. There's sort of other things as well happening. Microgeneration. One of the things that I sort of didn't realise wasn't in place when I moved over here was, say, the feed in to the grid from microgeneration of electricity. So that's actually been put forward, and it's going to go ahead, say, around July time, I think it is this year. So I wonder if that's going to have the same impacts as it did when we had that in the UK. And, you had arrays. Agriculture was the biggest sort of sector for PV in the UK for the first few years of that being rolled out, the feed-in tariffs. So I just wonder if we're going to see the same happen here. And I think the business case, obviously, for renewables stands up so much better if you've got the ability to feed in excess energy back to the grid. Alongside, I know one of the COP26 focus areas is around energy storage. Could that renewable energy storage, could that impact, say, for help Ireland to reach the goals that way? I think, transportation, it's a slightly different population intensity. We've got the main hubs, say, Dublin and Cork and some big cities, but there's quite sort of, the network, say, for rolling out EV charging will be different. And I think, improving public transport will be different again, because the infrastructure is in need of sort of modernisation. So I think there's a few things there that are going to be challenges, but then on the other side, there's so many positives in terms of, once these say the microgeneration is put in place, I think local people have got a bit more space than we would have had in the UK, so there's going to be a bit more opportunity for us to replace some of the PV on roofs. Things will be a lot easier. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest challenges that I've seen so far.
Okay, thank you very much. And Toby, on this theme with using net zero and looking at technology, how do you see smart tech, or the IoT, the Internet of Things, and technologies there? What role are they going to have to play around helping companies deliver on their net zero target?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I think it's a really interesting area, one I'm really interested in, and I'm sure it's one that can really be used to engage with FMs as well. So I think, it's a growing area. We've all heard of kind of smart buildings and smart cities, but still we're not overly sure what that means in practice. I think lots of people. So I think it's about breaking things down and what it means, especially from a FM's point of view, how that would be useful. So, for example, we can have, like I've mentioned earlier, occupancy sensors in buildings. But then if you link those sensors in with HVAC systems, with heating and cooling, with lighting, you can get incredible savings just from fairly simple things like that. So I think linking those building services, because often in a big office building, for example, you've got a million different electronic services going on. So how do we use smart technologies to try and link those together? And it is a big issue. It's very complicated. I think one of the key barriers is there's just an overwhelming choice of technologies and ways of doing it for lots of FMs to look at, and they're thinking, where do we even start with all this? It's a bit like a kid in a sweet shop. It's almost an overwhelming choice. So where can we start from there? So I think the role that the climate group tries to do with that is to engage with companies to present some best practice examples and case studies and promote that peer-to-peer learning. So if we get someone presenting saying, this is how we did it, here's how we financed it, here are the benefits, here's some of the barriers we had to get over, I think that's a good way of getting across those messages and promoting the benefits to it. So from a purely energy efficiency point of view, I think it can be great. But also, like I said earlier, we want buildings that are not only energy efficient, they're also healthy and productive buildings as well. So if we saw this case study recently where one of the big banks in the City of London, they noticed that the productivity of staff dropped way off in the afternoons, especially in the summer, and they put some CO2 monitors in the building. And they noticed basically in the afternoon when everyone was starting to get a bit snoozy and drop off after lunch, the CO2 levels were actually getting way too high. So what they did was link those CO2 monitors to the HVAC system to make sure there was enough fresh air inside the building. And just really simple things like that. I think it cost them about 20 grand to do that scheme. So really, hardly any upfront costs, which most businesses could afford. And that increased productivity, by 300 staff by 10%, I think it was, just from a really simple thing like that. So I think it's one of the issues with smart tech is that, some early examples, companies or cities, if you're looking at smart cities, have just collected all this data and then thought, right, what do we do with this? This should be interesting, but we're not actually sure how to interpret any of it. So what companies need to do, what cities need to do if it's smart cities, is to flip the question around and say, what are we trying to solve? So are we trying to improve indoor air quality? Are we trying to improve office efficiency, how we use the building? Are we trying to improve staff productivity? And starting from that end with these key problems you're trying to solve, and then work out what you need to do and what data you need to collect. So I think it's spinning the question around. And yeah, having those data insights can be really valuable. So Kundal, one of the architects, are really at the forefront of healthy offices and buildings. They basically did a scheme where they were monitoring air quality inside their office, and it was all really good. They're the first office is by St Paul's in London. They're one of the first offices in the UK to have a well building standard, so very high efficiency, but also nice for employees and productive and looking after their health and well-being. And then they suddenly noticed from this air quality monitoring that halfway through the year, the air quality dropped way off and was getting to, sort of illegal levels again. And they tried to work out what was going on here. And it basically turned out that a company had moved into the floor above them that was previously unoccupied. And they were basically sucking out from their HVAC system all the good air from their office and stealing all their good air and putting it in their office. So, they wouldn't have had a clue if they hadn't have had these data collection sort of apparatus in the office. They wouldn't have had a clue, and they would just think, oh, our office is suddenly really stuffy and everyone's falling asleep. So, having those data insights can be really key, not only for sustainability, but also for health and well-being. And I think FM's really key in being able to sort of cover both those things, but just starting with the question, what are we trying to solve? What are we trying to improve? And then go from there, not the other way around.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sophie, tying in something Anne mentioned earlier, of course, the COP conference was meant to have been last year, but for obvious reasons, with COVID-19, it was postponed and moved on a year. So do you believe our response to COVID-19 at an organisational level has made it easier to drive forward net zero and other sustainability outcomes?
I think so, really, because basically of the fast response initially that people had to give, business continuity plans had to be put in place and then implemented. So what we had anecdotal reports from last year as well when we did a roundtable was that it became a lot easier to make decisions around sustainability or decisions that impacted on sustainability. And we don't necessarily know the complete why of that, perhaps because, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw that all those cars off the road had an impact on the emissions. So we saw that actually decisions at a very individual level obviously had an impact because of the economies of scale. So I think there was a receptiveness that you could make a difference at a very low level, but also in general, people's awareness around the sustainability issues were greater, and they were going to use that as a consumer, both, well, in the buying of things, but also as an employee and asking around things. Combined then, of course, with the fact that that whole shift from home really put that wider sustainability, I think, more at the forefront of organizations' mind. So I think that's definitely something that will be built upon in the long term. So the one thing that I want to kind of link this bit on is something that Toby was just saying around other areas that FM can really play a role in, because I think the whole pandemic has, and the response required to really support people working from home, has brought those other areas at the forefront. And it's often fallen square into the responsibility of the FM. So that whole awareness piece around supporting health and well-being, some of the links to air quality that Toby already talked about, but also moving forward from a wider, not just performance effect, but also just a health perspective, keeping the air clean so that you don't spread diseases. So ventilation, who would have thought that that was like a hot topic at this point, where normally it's just kind of relegated to almost the boiler room discussion. So the whole COVID response at a very organizational level, I think, has made the different linkages a little bit clearer and at the forefront of why some of these things are important. And of course, you can then kind of go down that line of thinking with, if you increase your ventilation, how does that impact on your energy efficiency or your bill, your energy bill at the end of the year type thing? How can we improve that? And that leads to different decision making again in this kind of area. So I think the overall awareness that the pandemic has instilled in people has definitely seeped through at organizational level and has made the art of the possible a lot more possible.
No, brilliant. No, thank you for that. And just maybe exploring it slightly further. So what tools do you think are there to help organizations therefore deliver upon their net zero, using those experiences of where we were pre and where we are now post pandemic?
I think they're actually pretty generic tools that aren't just focused on net zero. It's also wider sustainability. And I think in a very focused way, there's kind of about three things. It's audits, needs analysis, and measurement frameworks, metrics and KPIs. Who doesn't like one? Audit, because you just really need to understand where you are. You need to have a benchmark. You need to know where you're going from. It might be helpful as well to understand then where you're really lagging, or actually where you can relax a little bit more. But the needs analysis is very important, and that also builds on something that Toby was saying before. What's the question you're actually trying to answer? What are you trying to achieve here? So it's really important to understand what the stakeholder needs, and there is a variety of stakeholders, and that does affect the landlord, because as we've already talked about, they may not necessarily want to invest in things. It involves the employer, especially, when we're talking about workplaces. It involves, what does the employee want? And then how will suppliers be able to meet that, or how can they drive that? So you really need to understand what the different needs are and how each of those stakeholders can provide a solution. And that sometimes might mean that you need to explore completely new things, and you need to engage that debate with the landlord and talk about new ways of financing refurbishments or a transition to renewables. And then the third one, before I lose my train of thought, is really you need a measurement framework. So after you've decided what you're going to do, not everything at once. You need to have clear metrics about how you're going to achieve that, when you're going to achieve that. You need to understand as well whether you're truly achieving that or are people just reporting against that. So, you know, some independent validation would be good. Obviously, from my perspective, I would say have a look at the social value framework, because that's a useful one to engage with suppliers. But the sustainable development goals, you know, they've got a range of measures as well that you can start measuring. You know, again, they are vast, but if you can be precise about what you need to do to address the needs that you've got, you can progress that way, and then you can build on that. There are, of course, things that you need to have around that. You know, you, especially in workplaces, you need to make sure that you communicate and engage with your workforce about what you're trying to do, because otherwise you can't even get your needs analysis properly. And of course, you need to have that clear leadership about driving that. But if we're talking about tools, I would say audit, needs analysis, and measurement frameworks, metrics.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Just sort of a fourth topic, and one or two of the questions that come in are relating more around this growth in the social aspects of sustainability. I know it's something in the IWFM sustainability survey that we saw since 2015, 2016, growth in areas such as social value and well-being coming to the fore, and not replacing but working alongside the traditional environmental areas of sustainability. Obviously, what we've also seen more recently is a huge increase in public awareness through the COVID-19 pandemic, and how they have started to further influence discussion and agreement around COVID. I'm getting a little bit of feedback from anyone else's. That's much better. Excellent. So just on that as a point, apologies for that. We're just talking about social areas of sustainability, and the question to you, Rachel, bringing in the pandemic as well, is how can the reimagined office in this post-COVID world we're now hopefully entering contribute to improving on organisational sustainability?
Well, I think we've talked about sort of the actual physical things that we can do to sort of make people feel comfortable to come back to the office, you know, like the ventilation, occupancy, having sort of measures in place for, you know, not overcrowding restrooms and things like that, and providing transportation for, providing spaces for green transportation like cycling or something, you know, improving cycle facilities. And that's sort of all of the basic things that I think that the people will demand to be able to come back to the office safer and feel more comfortable to come back into those spaces. But I think really, if you look at it sort of in a wider perspective, it's like, you know, we want to come back and we want to do things differently. We want to, if we had a fresh sheet of paper, what would the office look like? And actually, would it just be the office we'd look at? And it probably wouldn't. If you think years and years ago, we lived where we worked. As transportation became better, we moved further away, and it, you know, actually this thought of, say, the 15-minute city could, you know, can we get around the office? Around the city in 15 minutes from where we need to live, where we need to work, where we need to find our green spaces. It all comes into play, and if we had all of those things in a melting pot, what would it look like? And I think, you know, over time we might see more mixed residential commercial spaces, definitely more spaces. We won't see the old, you know, I worked in the City of London for years. You'd go there Monday to Friday, it was completely busy, every coffee shop was open. Go in there on a Saturday and the coffee shops are all closed and there were no retail outlets were open. You've got things like the Broadgate Estate, where, you know, they're actually spending a lot on the place, you know, the estate itself, so that people would want to be part of that on the weekends. They'd want to be part of that as a social. They want to go there. And all of these different things create an environment for how the workplace of the future is also mixed with, say, the new way of living in the future. Fortunate enough, I recently worked on a paper with Arup called Making Place, and that specifically looked at how we need to create these environments. So if we're working on a development, we've got a new development called Wilton Park that we're working on at the moment, and that's the clues in the title. There's a massive park involved in this with an office development, but there's also opportunities for, say, the retail and the restaurants that would create a space that's over and above, say, just an office space. And I think it's how we look at rebuilding and the making place of the future. How do we actually make a vision of the future that's slightly different but sustainable? It's going to be much more attractive for businesses to recruit and maintain and add value to their businesses in these sustainable communities. And I think if we look at that and linked with transportation, increasing these 15-minute city principle, increased cycling for availability throughout cities. If we look at the whole infrastructure of what makes up the office, it isn't just the office that we'd be looking at, it's the whole community around it.
Thank you for that, Rachel. And Toby, perhaps with your experience around energy, looking at the same thing, is we've had this juxtaposition over the last year where offices, notwithstanding ventilation systems running for longer, using much less energy, but everybody being at home using much more. So we've seen an increase in that. Are there any other lessons we can learn from dealing with the pandemic that we could apply in the future toward tackling climate change to find that happy medium in terms of work-life balance and also a sustainable life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some real key parallels between the two. Obviously, we've seen it is possible to massively restructure the government and the ways of working, if a crisis does happen like this. So, that has thrown up that, we're not stuck in these old ways, and it might even be the case that it's given us the shake-up that we needed, and we can, it's been proven now we can work, effectively and productively at home, whereas before I think lots of kind of bosses didn't entirely trust leaving their workers at home for 4 or 5 days a week, whereas now I think, even though it's been difficult for lots of people and some people's working from home conditions aren't the best, lots of people have seen the benefits from that, and not having to spend 2 hours commuting every day. You're going to be, more alert and more productive, hopefully. So I think, it does show what we can achieve when we all put our mind to it. I think, one of the key things we can do as well is link, like I said earlier, linking the kind of economic recovery from COVID to climate. And, there's lots of ways we can look to build back better, like Anne said, and these phrases being passed around, and the green recovery. So I think these are real key things that we can latch on and engage people on the issue of climate change, because, some people, it is a bit of an abstract term. We hear about it every day on the news and things, but lots of people are still not sure entirely how it applies to them. So we can tie it in with jobs, with the green recovery. And like I said, when you invest in energy efficiency, it provides green jobs, as we call them. And, it can be a real key boost to business. It's not just this kind of green issue. It's kind of mainstream now. I think on a sort of practical level, it's shown that we really need to listen to scientists and get behind the science, like we've done with COVID, because it was fairly mainstream even 10 years ago to have sort of climate skeptic voices in mainstream outlets, whereas I think that has completely switched around in 10 years. And I think, looking at COVID, following the science has shown us the way to be, and given scientists that prominence again, because they might have been kind of been put on the back burner in a lot of climate change debates, and it's been left to politicians to do that. Whereas I think now we're hearing more of those voices. Just on the purely kind of practical levels, like we said, we're going to see more flexible working. I think it's inevitable. So what does that mean in terms of energy efficiency? Also, like Rachel said as well, we need to provide better quality buildings and buildings that are more flexible for these new hybrid ways of working that we're going to have, and making sure FMs can really help to make sure all these systems integrate, and so we can work effectively from wherever we are. And yeah, and what that means for buildings as well. So like we said, there's going to be an increase in like shared working spaces, multiple occupied buildings. So how can FMs get involved in that agenda and make sure these buildings are being used effectively and efficiently, but also safely, you know, when we start going back to the office, whenever that might be. And I think just on a kind of final note, I think, you know, it's been a huge challenge for everyone all over the world, COVID-19, but we've I think, you know, we've pulled through, and it's the same thing with climate change. It's a huge issue. It can be tempting to just bury your head in the sand and think it doesn't affect me, so, or it's a too big a issue that I can comprehend, so I'm not going to bother engaging with it. But actually what we've seen is we all need to work together, and we all can pull together, and I think remaining positive in spite of all that adversity is really key, and, you know, massive parallels between COVID and climate change on that.
Excellent, thank you, Toby. And developing that theme slightly further. Sorry, Sophie, do you think that the combination of COVID-19 and COP26 is actually changing the toolbox for the workplace? Are we going to start seeing different things in the future as far as facilities management professionals go in their ability to mitigate climate change?
Rachel and Toby were just talking about integrating more cleaner ways of transport, etc., making sure that we've got more mixed use, etc., and that all of that is being facilitated by the FM. All of that is already best practice within FM. I think what COVID-19 and COP is doing is just making that possibly a little bit more accessible to the wider community. So I think it is building on what's already there. Technology as an enabler. I don't think everyone had the same readiness before the pandemic. So we've seen quite a different shift in that engagement with technology and people's acceptance in having to deal with that technology. And that, of course, is helping to then accelerate the appetite, one should say, to really explore all those other things. Whether it is those smart technology like those occupancy sensor, that's not new, but it is just people are thinking much more readily now, actually that's there, let's use it. And then of course they will find their way to the other applications as well that will be very useful as well. And I think the whole working from home and again, technology enabling people to working from home in itself is also kind of expanding the mind of the FM, sometimes in a rather daunting way, that they're also responsible for those people not in the workplace. But again, that's very much an opportunity, because at the very beginning of the pandemic, we sometimes got questions, oh, if the office is going to disappear, what does that mean for us as an FM in the building? It's like the office will never actually disappear, because there are still the collaborative elements that will continue to be fostered within that communal setting. But yes, people might need to work from home, and someone will need to enable them to do that. Someone will still need to be able to look after their health and well-being in the several ways that many workplace managers have completely taken on board if they hadn't already been responsible for that. So it really demonstrates that wide-ranging impact that FMs can kind of make. And I think the other thing that's kind of helping to unlock a wider toolbox possibly is that leadership shift, the greater awareness, the greater willingness to actually give FMs the tools that they need to deliver. So I think that might not have been so readily available if it hadn't been for COVID, because they've seen the results now. It does work. People have been enabled and remained productive outside the office for such a long time. Not necessarily everyone is thinking that it might not be an aberration, but there is a great number of organizations, including a lot of the banks, that might say, actually, this does work. Why do we want to pay for these very expensive offices? It's time to change our mindset on this. So I think that just opens up a world of possibilities, some of them which will be new, but a lot of the best practice is hopefully becoming common practice.
Thank you. And one more thought on that, Anne, is what opportunities do you think tackling climate change brings to the wider sustainability challenges we face?
Well, I think even before COVID, and despite of COP, ever since 2015, when the UN goals started to come more to the forefront and people started to look at those, what sustainability is, has been defined as a means is a lot more. I think now, outside of environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and in particular equality and inequality rather, has been exposed through COVID. The disparity between opportunity and access to health and access to resources and education have all been under a spotlight because of COVID. And I think bringing together the themes of climate change and COVID recovery gives us the chance to cover the gaps or try to address some of those gaps in social sustainability. And I think the key to that is the green skills and jobs. Toby referenced already about them. And the thing that I've seen setting up and being involved in developing, circular economy business models, the thing that I've seen is they bring skills, they bring job numbers, they bring education, they bring training and apprenticeships, because changing business practices from being completely wasteful to understanding resources, looking at different ways of using them, extending the life of them, brings a requirement for engineering, for logistical organisation, for marketing. And so when, looking mainly at traditional, more wasteful business practices where organisations didn't look after their assets in, let's say, a circular way, perhaps they're looking more wastefully at they're moving or changing or closing offices, and the furniture and equipment in them would have just gone for recycling. Looking at more circular economy focused practices where you're looking at the resources in the workplace, thinking we might be closing our offices, we might be having less in them. How can we use those assets to try and address some of the other sustainability challenges? Looking at, extending their life through reusing them. And that in itself will create more green jobs and greater skills, and hopefully jobs that give greater levels of satisfaction and reward. So it's one agenda as far as I'm concerned. You can't address climate change and ignore poverty. You can't change the working environment and not focus on well-being. It's a little bit all or nothing as far as I'm concerned. Maybe makes me even more optimistic, or maybe more easily disappointed. I don't know, but I don't think one comes without the other. I don't think people are just looking at this. I think they're looking at this and also going, how can we deliver this in a way that is more socially equal, that takes on board, we haven't even talked about diversity and inclusion as another issue. And as I say, I know we haven't got time for that, but we've also had the Black Lives Matter movement at the same time. All of these areas have had spotlights on. So, whilst we're changing things, Greg, let's just change everything as far as I'm concerned.
Brilliant.
I'm up for the challenge.
Thanks for that, Anne. I know Sophie has to go at 4:00, but we still have a couple of questions that are coming through. Rachel, Anne, and Toby, are you happy to stay, and we'll just carry on and take the questions through? Brilliant. Thank you for that. As I said, I know you need to go, Sophie. Thank you very much for your contribution. It's been really, really informative. Thank you for your time, and have a good rest of your day.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm a bit sad I have to go now. I wanted to continue talking. And shout out to Anne for saying it's all interlinked and interconnected. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, Sophie. Bye. A question we've had in, so I don't know whether one of you or all three of you would like a look at this one. Is an interesting take on it. It said Microsoft have talked about being carbon negative. This can only be achieved if their suppliers are at least going for carbon zero. So what are your views in terms of, should FMs and property managers add significant procurers across many goods and services be looking to use source greener for sustainable products to actually help drive that change? You know, from a supply chain perspective, if they're going to be carbon negative, where does that leave you? Sorry, Toby, you had your hand up first, and I think Rachel thereafter.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah, I think it's a growing area, and we're seeing now companies are not just looking at their own emissions; they're looking at the whole value chain. So one of our members of EP100, our commitment on energy productivity is H&M, the retailer. So they're looking at their whole value chain now. So they're only, sourcing off those best companies that they can do in terms of carbon emissions. Because I think they had a stat that their own stores, so the H&M store, the kind of front of the brand, as you were, it's only about 1% of their overall emissions are their actual store footprint. So the rest is all their supply chain. So I think it's key. You can be, have the most ambitious and sustainable buildings or offices in the world, but if your whole supply chain is, fueled by fossil fuels and all the rest, then it's kind of pointless and it's just a bit of a front. So I think it's definitely going to be an area of interest going forwards. And yeah, it's a massive task. And you can think what you like about those big tech companies, but I think it really does show good leadership from Microsoft to go carbon positive, and they're actually doing it not from the present day. They're basically going back to all the emissions they've ever emitted since Bill Gates started it in his garage or whatever it was in 1980. So yeah, I think it can only be a good thing, but it's going to be a really important issue going forward.
Excellent, thank you, Toby. Was there anything, Rachel or Anne, you'd like to add? Rachel.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as a procurer, you have an opportunity to ask for what you want, really, and asking people some simple questions around their products. I always, and Anne will probably advocate me on this one, I hope she does. But if you ask for a recycled content in any of your products, you're actually helping the recycling chain, if you like. You're creating a value for recycled content. The people then would want recycled product, the recycling your plastic bottle or tin or whatever it is, that actually creates a value. And then as soon as that creates a value, then people could, it could flip you from, say, disposing of your waste to actually getting paid to collect your waste. And then all of a sudden it transforms that whole proposition into actually, no, we're trying to push people to get recycling rates up. And then actually it will turn back to oh God, everybody, you can't stop people recycling so much because there's a value in it. So I think as a person with any purchase responsibility, you have the opportunity to make some choices, and how you value those choices can impact on the service and the carbon emissions that you get. We've talked about it for years in the construction company, having chains of custody, FSC timber, your quarry product chain of custody, to understand where things are coming from and to make the choice whether you want to transport something from Brazil or whether you could get an alternative that's local. Obviously, all of that has a carbon impact, and people who don't measure their Scope 3 carbon emissions, you're going to have to, and it's coming, and more people are doing financial-based Scope 3 carbon assessments. So looking at their spend, picking out the top spend from it, or the line item spend, and then giving that a calculation as best you can, and then creating a euro per widget carbon intensity factor, so that you can then start tracking your carbon of your purchases a lot easier. So I think Scope 3 is a definite and it goes back to the Aviva point where they're looking at their Scope 3 carbon emissions through investment. It's exactly the same. If your business is made up of purchasing anything, if you've got the opportunity to have an impact on decisions made of purchased items, yeah, you have the responsibility to do it.
Thank you, Rachel. Anne, anything further to add?
Just something really small on that. It is about the economics of this is both the root cause in and the root cause out. We've not been paying the true cost of production or living our whole lives, right? And that's why we're in this mess. But actually, to Rachel's point, if you create if something can become an asset or is considered an asset through the power of procurement, then actually that is a game changer. And one of the things that we're seeing out of net zero carbon is people are coming to, we already do a lot of refurbished manufactured office furniture, but people are now coming to us saying because they're measuring their scope 3, there's an increased intensity of interest in existing furniture assets being refurbished. The drive for that has happened significantly through people looking at their scope 3 emissions. And literally just before this meeting, I was sat looking at laptop tables made from desktop wastes. And we've put in a whole activity of design and development about taking the products that people are now going to be throwing away because they're reducing their office space, and we're now creating storage and laptop tables out of them. That's directly as a result of people measuring their carbon, saying they want net zero products, thinking circular about it, and creating a value from a waste. And it's those types of things. It's just, this isn't beyond us. It's just a different way of thinking. And I think, like Toby, I applaud Microsoft for starting and putting out brave statements like that, because they filter through the supply chain, and it brings innovation and behaviour change.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Anne. I'm conscious of time, and I have one more question just for each of you in turn. Same question, but just one answer, which goes back to COP26. So at the end of our discussions, imagine we're in the first week of December this year, and when we're well embedded in the new normal. What one aspect, impact, or action would you like to see as a measure of the success of COP26? And I'll go Rachel, Toby, Anne. So
just unmuting. 1 minute. Sorry, it just takes a second to unmute. Oh gosh, this question is hard to just choose one. Looking at the COP26 sort of agenda for this meeting, I think that for me, it would be the plan to transition away from coal power. I think if we had an absolute plan that people could sign up to, understanding the transition impacts for developing countries, I think coal power is significant as a mindset, and I think obviously as a pollutant and an emitter, but I think we've been talking about this for a long time now, and I think it needs to be off the table. We know that there's solutions that work. We know that there's things that we can replace it with. So for me, if I had to choose one, and there are lots of others that I really like on the list as well, it would be around eliminating coal power. But I do have to say that I think also we need to put biodiversity on the list. It's not high enough of the agenda, in my opinion, on COP26. And I think it needs to be, 70% of all wildlife has gone in the last 50 years. We're part of that. We're animals too, so it's not boding well.
Thank you. Brilliant answer. Thank you, Rachel. Toby.
Yeah, I'm going to keep mine very brief as we're over time and very high level. But my one wish to come out of COP is we turn more of the rhetoric into action. There's been a lot of talk. Every government talks a good talk, but we need to see more action from that. So that's my one wish. Lovely. Thank you, Toby.
Toby said exactly what I wanted to say. Literally it is action. It's, as I've said earlier, it's not signposting, it's not talk. It's very concrete steps and timetables that we can have accountability around. And that to me would feel good if I felt that I could start to measure and track and see more easily that change is deliverable and happening and unified, and we're not just looking after our own countries, we're leveraging that knowledge more to the emerging economies as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Anne. And I think in looking to draw the session to a close, can I say thank you very much indeed for all your time today. It's been very, very informative, and I hope the audience has had some takeaways as well. I know I'm the moderator, and I've got 2.5 pages of notes here I've made from our discussion. So I'm certainly taking something away, and I hope likewise everybody else has been listening. So I'll say thank you very much indeed again, and I'll hand back to Hugh.
Can I just say to the panel, thank you very much. I found that incredibly informative and thought-provoking. And I think that what I take away from this it's actually like everything else. The first step is with you, and the more that we can do from self to drive forwards. The big issues are too big to cope with. Smart cities, where do you start? But you've got to start somewhere, and I think that's what's come through. And if COP26 does anything to bring that to the fore, to change cultures, I think it can only be a good thing. I think the actions coming out of it will be a little bit harder to judge in the short term, but I think if they can do that, it's an achievement. I really want to say thank you. On Rachel's comment, Workplace and Facilities Expo will be around in March next year. We won't all have died, but and hopefully biodiversity has increased. But I'd just like to say thank you to the panel, and this will be available as on-demand content on our website from early next week. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thanks.